Hello, everyone, and welcome to a series of pre-event speaker interviews in the run-up to our World Hydrogen North America Congress. This is taking place in Houston this year on the 31st of March for 3 days. My name is Dominic Coyne. I'm the program director, and I'm joined here today with Uyi Idahosa from the International Finance Corporation. Uyi leads project development and advisory services for Latin America and the Caribbean, based in Mexico, overseeing an 8 billion program focused on industrial decarbonization. His work spans across sectors like chemicals, hydrogen, fertilizer, and construction materials. With a global background in project development, financing, operations, Uyi has experience in Asia, Africa, the USA, and Latin America. He also holds a PhD in mechanical engineering and has spent 10 years with General Electric Oil and Gas and Baker Hughes before joining the International Finance Corporation. Uyi, you truly have a global perspective, and it's unique to have you here for that alone, but thank you very much for joining us.
No, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you and looking forward to the conference.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Well, to kick things off, Uyi, I guess the audience will want to perhaps know a little bit more about your background, how you got into your current career and your interest in hydrogen and the space in general. And if you don't mind, perhaps let us know your opinions on the current state of the market, and we'll go from there.
Excellent. No, thank you. I've been fortunate to now have been with the IFC for just under 5 years now. And as you mentioned, prior to this, essentially spent about 10 years between General Electric, the oil and gas business, and Baker Hughes. So my background is quite I'm a little bit of a hybrid, if you will, between someone who has spent some time in the kind of operational space and the technology space, and then now in financing of kind of very complex projects, and previously in the operations of kind of very complex operations as well, both on the technical side and also on the commercial side. My background is oil and gas. So in a sense, a lot of my decarbonization work is, shall I say, paying for some of the, work that I did previously, if we can say that. I think, obviously, as someone with a background in heavy industry, I have very keen interest in this whole sort of discussion around how we decarbonize hard to abate sectors. I think the rationale is clear in my mind, right? Which is we have a very large, sometimes aging installed base of a lot of industrial facilities. There's a stat I read recently that a lot of the majority of the fertilizer plants that are in existence are, 40, 50 years old. And so that fleet needs to be renewed, right? Naturally. And you look at this across other production of heavy industry materials. And so we view our work at the World Bank as being a key catalyst of kind of decarbonizing that fleet as it gets refreshed and kind of rebuilt, and preparing the world for a future in which we can produce a lot of these fundamental materials for our lives in a low carbon kind of climate friendly manner. So I'll pause there.
Absolutely. So it sounds like you're saying there is a bit of a refreshing of some of the existing infrastructure needed. I wonder if you think that there's perhaps some synergy that can be had there with the newer types of hydrogen coming in and the big scale-up plans that everyone has for this industry.
Certainly, and I think you see that in some of the early applications of hydrogen in refineries, right? So I think, obviously, as the bank, our mandate really makes it difficult for us to work in, let's call it, traditional oil and gas kind of operations. But to the extent, hydrogen can be used in some of these facilities to decrease the sort of carbon intensity of the products, I think we all benefit as a planet, first of all, and then as an industry. So that's one. I think where we concentrate a lot of our capital at the bank is on some of these sort of prime mover activities that can really lead to not just marginal benefits, as you could get by potentially, let's say, injecting green hydrogen into an existing refinery, but things that really lead to kind of deep fundamental changes in the production of these molecules, right? So that's why green hydrogen is very interesting, because it's one of the few levers that you can use to truly decarbonize, let's say, fertilizer production or the production of methanol, which is such a base material in the sort of industrial world. So I think there is space to do some of those things where perhaps there are pilot projects where, a lot of us are still, electrolyzer technology is, decades old, but using it at the scale at which we intend to is fairly new. So there is room to perhaps, generate new hydrogen, mix that with gray into an existing fertilizer plant or an existing refinery, etc. There is room to that. For that, as long as, the idea is eventually to scale that production into sort of fundamental, sort of large-scale deployment of green hydrogen in producing sort of larger, more volumes of these molecules that are actually kind of low carbon.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like we've moved from out of the honeymoon phase of hydrogen to really looking at where it works well. And building on that, I mean, you're obviously going to be speaking in our program. We've got you on a very interesting panel looking at the path to the final investment decision, contracts and strategies involved. Could you give the audience a bit of an idea of, potentially what you plan to share on that panel, and a little teaser to get them to get their appetites wet?
Sure, absolutely. As you mentioned, I lead our early stage investment work in a very large pipeline of about $8 billion. And the majority of that is in low carbon decarbonization of hard to abate projects of some manner, right? Obviously, we're a development bank, so we look for opportunities to also work on smaller projects in places like the Caribbean, etc. But the fact remains, in at least the world of sort of industrials and chemicals, is that economies of scale are important, right? So I'm going to be talking about kind of what we look for as we look to kind of participate in projects, given our development mandate, right? Obviously, there are risks when you think from a project financing perspective, or even from a corporate financing perspective, that we are able to take as a sort of development finance institution that's dedicated to emerging markets that a lot of commercial banks cannot take. And so we're talking about a lot of what we consider to be, for example, the tenets of our green hydrogen strategy as IFC, and kind of what we look for in some of these, let's call them pioneer projects that we look to kind of get involved in.
Okay. And given that you have got a good spread across various countries and regions, to what you're seeing at the moment, do you think there's some regions that are going to have an easier time of getting investment in hydrogen projects going forward? And why do you think that is? What are you seeing that's making it so?
I mean, whenever you look at investment, the fundamentals need to make sense. I think it's just basics of investing, right? I think obviously in generating green hydrogen, the availability of, world-class kind of competitive renewable energy is really key, because essentially that really sets the price of hydrogen that you're going to achieve, right? And therefore the price of the derivative molecule. I think that and we'll go into this perhaps on the discussion, we have the ability both on the IFC side of the bank, which primarily works with the private sector, to engage with the public side of the bank, the IBRD, to help at the kind of policy level as well, right? So where we can be helpful to create a policy environment that's an enabler to these private sector projects, or we have a government that's already kind of been front running or has been a front runner in terms of setting enabling policies. All of these things come together quite nicely to lay the foundation for us to look at projects, right? So, I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit more on the panel, but I think we view our role as an enabler, especially in this early phase of kind of adoption of a lot of these sort of decarbonization technologies like hydrogen and SAF, etc.
Great, great. I won't get you to share anymore because then there'll be no use people turning up at the event. But yeah,
Sure.
thank you for your opinions there, and yeah, you're in a very interesting space for this specifically. So on to one final question, and it's a bit more of a controversial one. So Uyi, with your focus on industrial decarbonization in Latin America, there's been a lot of talk about the green premium in hydrogen and other clean technologies in regions where cost efficiency is critical. Do you think the push for green hydrogen and sustainable aviation fuels could jeopardize economic growth, especially for developing nations?
It's a great question. From our perspective, obviously, an enabling environment that makes it clear that there is some kind of incentive to use kind of lower carbon molecules helps everyone, right? Both from a kind of market creation perspective, but also from a sort of investment enabling perspective, right? So, however, the fact remains that, and we saw this in solar, right? Nowadays, solar is very, very competitive almost anywhere in the world that you look. But there was a time when it was very, very expensive and very difficult to kind of be affordable, especially in emerging markets, which is the core of our mandate, right? So, and that's what I referred to in my earlier comments. It does mean that in the early phase of adoption, we view our role as somewhat similar, which is how can we play a role in this early phase of the project to early phase of adoption to make it possible to sort of have some of these front runner projects in emerging markets, with the understanding that there is a natural learning curve that will play out and will make it more and more affordable to kind of get these projects off the ground, right? So I think it's a combination of things. I don't think it's an either or. I don't think it's either you do green hydrogen and decarbonize, or it remains unaffordable for everyone. I think there is a world of and, if you will, where there are front runner projects that are sort of enabled with various instruments, whether it's contracts for differences on the offtake side, grant funding, ability to do blended finance, first loss kind of mechanisms, all of these to enable those first, let's say, pioneer front runner projects kind of reach the market, and then the learning curve can kick in as the natural kind of course of events usually does, right? So I view it actually not necessarily controversially. I think there's a world in which emerging markets can play a role, and we as the World Bank see ourselves as an important part of making that happen.
Absolutely. And perhaps even there might be some opportunities to jump over some mistakes of existing industries that we've made in the more developed development. So it's definitely an interesting point to raise. So Uyi, we've run out of time, and I really appreciate your answers and your insights. Audience, if you're wanting to attend and hear more from Uyi, he's going to be speaking at the event on the 1st of April in the afternoon on this investment panel. Please check out our website to find out a bit more about our other speakers and the rest of the program. Uyi, do you have any closing remarks for the audience?
No, just to thank you for the time on this kind of short discussion, and yeah, and the invite to speak at the event. I think it's going to be an outstanding kind of discussion panel and event, and yeah, looking forward to see the audience and various kind of stakeholders in Houston. Thank you.
Great stuff. Uyi, thank you again for your time, and thank you for everyone watching. There's going to be more interviews coming up soon, so stay tuned, and we'll see you in Houston in April. Thanks so much.
Thank you.